Welcome to the Deep Learning Chat, and as Scott Adams said this morning on his show, everything's going to be okay. I'm Radical Liberation from St. Louis, Missouri in the United States, and I have Mad Mercenary here from Australia.
Hello there.
Okay, so real quick, things to get us rolling, and then we'll get into a main topic. I guess the real big news for this show is that we have decided to try changing the format slightly, which I am hoping that everyone's going to enjoy, because we're basically going to give you roughly the same amount of content, might end up being a little bit more, but we're going to split it up so that you're getting something from us every week. One of the things I gather is that regular content is good. When people can know that, you're going to be there every day, every week, whatever. They can set their clock by, I tune in at this day, this time. Those guys are there every week. That seems to work out well for everybody. So that's what we're going to try to do. But the way to do it without overwhelming me, because I don't have a lot of available time. I'm not sure Mad Merc does, despite being single. He seems to keep himself pretty busy. But to keep from overwhelming us, we're going to keep it to our every other week for the main topic, where there's typically some more research, and sometimes we like to bring in guests to help us with the topic and so forth. So we'll do that every other week. But in the weeks in between, we're going to switch our minis to be a standalone show. We've gotten great feedback on the minis. People like them. They'll be like, "Wow, that was worth it just for the minis," So let's take them at their word, and take folks at their word, and try treating it as its own show. See how it goes. One big advantage of this is that a shorter show. I think, as a YouTube consumer myself, shorter is sometimes rather nice, because you know what you're getting into. It's more limited commitment when you listen to it. It's 30 minutes or whatever. I'm guessing we're going to come out to like 30 to 45 minutes for those mini, kind of what I'm thinking. But will allow this sort of a deeper topic show to be a little tighter. Try to keep this to about 90 minutes each time. So we'll alternate between minis and big topics, I guess is the way to put it. A couple other quick things. Academic Agents Foundations of Economics, still available through this show at a 10% discount. His big Christmas period promotion is over, but I'd encourage you to get it if you are interested in the economic way of thinking. Academic Agent will get you going on that very well. And then finally, to support our show, we've got the super chats here, of course. But also, if you don't like so much giving money to big tech, and there's probably a lot of people feeling that way right now, we have alternatives. So subscribe stars in the show, our subscribe stars in the show description, and a Bitcoin address. If you want to send us Bitcoin, that would be greatly appreciated. And I don't know from Mad Mercenary's point of view, but from my wife's point of view, or from my point of view, I have the advantage of being able to tell my wife that the show is making some kind of money, which makes it easier to justify spending time on it. So helps me in my spousal negotiations. Also, I should mention, we were able to be quite generous due to the support with the prizes for the currency competition. We decided to, give back to the community, so to speak. So we were able to give out 6 silver coins altogether, 3 silver coins for the top prize, 2 for the second prize, and 1 for the third prize. And I'm watching them slightly nervously on my package tracker as they make their way to various destinations. And those should be arriving quite soon to the winners of the currency competition, which was fabulous fun. If you missed it, understandably, because we did it right around Christmas time, give it about 10 minutes, and I bet you'll be hooked, because Semiagog came in, and I'm sorry, who was it? Pharaoh. Semiagog and Pharaoh came in and kind of, took it seriously as a critique of the currency, and it was great. It was a lot more interesting than it had any right to be. So I recommend it. Okay, so we were going to start the year off with a mini show, but Mad Mercenary recommended that we go ahead and try to speak to issues of the day, shall we say. So let me give this as an introduction to our topic today. There's two paths that could be followed for unwinding an oppressive system, shall we say. In this case, it's the U.S. imperial state that I have in mind. And by the imperial state, I'm not just referring to the behavior of the U.S. in the international context, though I am, but also to the behavior of the U.S. government within the United States. So I think just calling it the imperial state captures some of that. So I think there's two paths to make it simplify it a bit, so be a bit simplistic. Two paths for winding down an oppressive system. And I'd like to actually, before we get to talk about sort of the issue of the day, the current political situation, draw on the resource of our own show and talk about the two paths of unwinding the slavery system. And I'm focusing on the slavery system within the United States because that's what we talked about and that's what I researched. So in the chat, I am putting a link to our show about slavery in the US, which was part of our short series on the history of Black Americans. And we actually described in that show two paths, one of which got cut short, but was making great progress. And then the second one that, pretty much everyone knows about. So what was the first path? Well, the first path is what I'm going to call the gentle path. And it involved manumission, which is the freeing of slaves by the slave owner. And this manumission was slowly but surely reducing the number of slaves. Well, how was this happening? This was in the early 1800s, by the way. It's because there were win-win deals being made between the slaves and slave owners, right? The slave owner would get the opportunity to essentially work or purchase their way out of slavery. Why would the slave owner do that? Well, as you may imagine, being a slave is not super motivating. Basically, you work and I get all the benefits of your work. Doesn't result with humans as opposed to robots, doesn't result in the highest quality work, as you can imagine, right? You have a major incentive issue. So what happened with a path to freedom is that the slave got a path to freedom. That's obvious. Maybe the less obvious thing is what the slave owner got out of it, which is that you got a slave that worked harder to buy themselves out of slavery. The result of this is that people made deals, basically. Even slaves ended up making a deal. Imagine that. In essence, the deal, I'm not sure how explicit it was, right? But the deal was, I'm going to work extra hard and I'm going to make, you money and work my way, you extra money and work my way towards freedom. And so you found out about, we talked about slaves who were basically set in business. They were skilled blacksmiths. They did blacksmithery for their slave owner, but they also would sell their services to other people. The slave owner began to develop an interest in the blacksmith, their blacksmith slave becoming more skilled because it was making the slave owner money. And the slave would, and they'd cut a deal such that the slave would be setting aside some money towards buying themselves out of freedom, or buying themselves out of slavery. Slave owner probably got some years of much better work. And as the slave maybe got slightly older, slightly out of prime working age anyway, well, they bought themselves out of slavery and it kind of worked out for everybody. So notice some things about this path. Number one, it was really working. Had it been allowed to continue, slavery would have died a gentle death. I don't think that's something they tell us in our history books, but we can absolutely see it in the numbers of slaves. Remember that in the U.S. Constitution, it had ended the slave trade by 1807, something like that. The U.S. Constitution had specified the year at which slave trade would end. So it was just a matter of what to do with the current slaves. And so they were shrinking. As they were shrinking, groups of towns or whatever, communities of free blacks were building up. And we talked a bit about that in our second show in that series, when we talked about the 100 years between the end of slavery and, say, the Civil War era. So, or I'm sorry, civil rights era. And so this was going along in a way that was really the best, well, not the best, but it was a reasonable way to bring this oppressive system to an end without, blowing everything up, right? Well, what happened? Essentially, the state governments and the federal government as well put a stop to it. The federal government had harsh runaway slave laws that basically caused everyone in the United States to be part of returning slaves to their owners. But that was just a piece of a larger system that included sometimes just straight out outlawing manumission. Slave owners couldn't free their slave, meaning they didn't really have property rights in their slave, right? They were limited by the state. Good comment. In fact, let me feature this. Good comment from Harold Bredsdorf. It was also what killed the slave from 1100 to 1600. Slavery stopped in Europe. We've talked a little bit about the end of slavery twice in Europe, but I think what he's suggesting is that manumission allowed slavery to come to an end naturally in the second time that slave maybe both times it would have played a role, I'm sure, in ending slavery in Europe. Anyway, so what happened to put an end to the gentle path? They basically put a stop to it with laws. And these win-win deals were not allowed anymore in various ways. So instead of gently winding, the slave system became more and more oppressive. When their initial attempts to stop the win-win deals didn't work because people found some other way around it or whatever, they put in more laws in place and so on and so forth until it was becoming quite a system, not just to the slaves, obviously, they were the biggest victims by far, but also just to regular folks who lived near plantations or whatever, who would be dragooned and drafted into working on slave patrols and night watches and so forth. Everybody was getting involved in keeping this system supported. It was really unsustainable, right? And it ended up in blood and fire. And so I call this the path of blood and fire. That's when you don't allow decentralized deals to be made between people, right, to unwind the oppressive system. But instead, a centralized power, whether a state government, federal government, whatever, a central state power becomes more and more draconian and oppressive until people start to revolt, right? And so then you get a cycle, right? You get revolt, and then you get clampdowns in response to the revolt. The clampdowns on people's freedoms and so forth bring resentment, and so you get more revolts in reaction. What would everybody here say is the reaction of the United States government to yesterday's events? Would you say they're choosing the gentle path or the path of blood and fire? I'm afraid it's the latter. I hope for the former, but see little hope of that right now. See little chance of that right now. So, said that, unfortunately, we need to talk about what comes next. What comes with the path of blood and fire, and how does that shake out in the case of the United States in particular, which is it's just true in various ways, which we'll talk about, that the United States plays an outsized role on the world stage. Now, given that we're a political economy, we're going to focus a little bit on the economic aspect of this, but implications besides impacts on money, right? And we'll get to some of that. So, what's been happening lately economically? Feel free to jump in, Mad Merc, and add to this list. But here's a few things I thought about. Thinking about the pandemic and so forth. Lost Mad Merc. Thinking about the COVID era, the pandemic, we've had a restriction of production and employment, right? Let's see here. It's almost back. Okay, there. You're back now, right? Can you hear me, Mad Merc?
Yes, sorry. For some reason, my entire system just froze. So,
okay,
please continue.
Right. So I want to talk about what's happened. I'm thinking about sort of economically and what comes next. So, or what could come next. Here's a few things that, with the lockdowns and so forth, there's been a restriction of production and employment. And then there's been an inflation of the money. Why do I say that? Well, one is, as we cover on our minis sometimes, Mad Merc's been highlighting the growth in the money supply, not just from the U.S. central bank, right, Mad Merc, but list off a few of the others, if you can remember, where we have seen a line go up.
So we have basically seen, as we like to refer to it as, a line go up, which is a bit of a joke here, in basically every single central bank across the world. The ECB, the European Central Bank, that's what that stands for, has done similar increases to the money supply. The Bank of Japan, the Chinese Central Bank, the Australian Central Bank, the New Zealand Central Bank, South African Central Bank. All of these places have done significant, and I mean significant, increases of the money supply. I believe the U.S. has just about doubled their money supply in the last
in 2020.
year. And it's in 2020. It has been an incredible ride, and if you don't know why that's really is a bad thing, I suggest you go back and watch our previous shows. We're not going to explain that one here because we do have other things to talk about. And really where I wanted to take this conversation, because I thought of this last night in a bit of a assignment writing haze. Okay, if this goes to blood and fire, as Radical Liberation is saying, how does this affect the economy? And it could go a couple ways depending upon the severity of this conflict. Firstly, I think what we need to think about is obviously the domestic situation in the United States and how the domestic economy is affected. So, will prices go up for certain goods? Will there be access? Will the supply of certain goods reduce or the demand for certain goods increase? Will there be outsized effect on certain industries? So, for example, financial industries, if there's violence within cities where these cities are financial hubs, will there be increased effect in those areas of the economy? And then the second part I think we really need to look at is the international effect. Obviously, the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world at the moment. And because it's a fiat currency that is no longer backed by anything physical, such as gold or silver, then it is backed by the stability and strength of the United States government. If this government becomes weakened in any way due to a civil conflict, where then does the strength of the dollar actually come from? And how does the reduced strength of the dollar affect international trade? Do we see alternatives come about, such as the euro or the Chinese dollar become more prominent? Or do these other currencies fall with the US dollar, as many of these currencies are backed in US dollars?
Yeah, it's an interrelated system, right?
Exactly.
They're nominally independent currencies, but in fact, we know, and I'll be getting to the into this with one of the articles I want to go through. We know that there's an interrelationship between the balance of trade and so forth, right? Which keeps the U.S. dollar doing what it's doing, and so it's a relations between the currencies, the trade that goes on between these countries, and so forth. So yeah, if the U.S., which is the U.S. dollar, which is the linchpin of the system, it seems, collapses, hyperinflates, whatever, people stop trusting it, stop wanting to use it, then there's knock-on effects internationally, right? Well,
Exactly.
okay. So
exactly.
have you laid out most of the territory you wanted to cover? Because I'm already wanting to jump in on one of the things you brought up about inflation.
Alrighty, let's get into it. That's the
Okay, so
domestic and the international is what we really need to focus on, because those are two
right.
aspects.
So I was talking about the restriction of production and employment and the inflation of the money supply. Well, you put those two things together.
I was kind of just listing off a lot of stuff, but
yeah, I know. But I had said, what are some things that have been happening over the last year? Well, one is restriction of production and employment, and the other is inflation of the money supply. They're handing out money to obviously all their cronies, but also they're handing out, stimulus payments in the U.S. There's this furlough thing in the U.K. I don't fully understand it, but I think basically there's a lot of people getting paid to just not work. So, more money chasing less stuff being produced equals, this is elementary economics, it can come out in various ways, but a possible way it could come out is visible price inflation, right? Now, what's tricky about this as you get into the Austrian theory of the business cycle and so forth, what's tricky about this is it may not be sort of the obvious thing you would look for. That is, you go to the store and milk is suddenly got a nominal price that's twice as high. I was paying $3 for a gallon, and now I'm paying $6 for a gallon. It might not be that obvious because price inflation can come out in prices that most consumers are not looking at, right? Price of commodities, for example, price of steel, and so forth. But it seems like production down, money supply up is a scary combo if you don't like inflation, price inflation, right? So that's one possible thing we would see coming next. Another is recession. So far, they're talking about, line go up, stocks are up, everything's fine. Trump has been saying this, right? He's always pumping up his job performance. Under me, stocks are up. Even in 2020, even with Corona, stocks are up. Well, as we know, that doesn't tell the full story. We have small businesses that are failing in tremendous numbers. I heard that 75% of small businesses in San Francisco, or 75% of businesses in San Francisco, have closed down or are closing down, something like that. I'm sorry, I don't have more solid numbers I can be confident about. But certainly I'm hearing that there are a large number of businesses failing in the US. And that's happening right now, right? That's before the crisis. I mean, we really are in a crisis, is the truth, with the lockdowns and the effect of those lockdowns on all the countries that are doing that lockdown, which as far as I can tell is the Anglosphere. Am I right about that, Mad Mark? I know the UK and the US and Australia and New Zealand, right? Canada. And it's pretty much the whole Anglosphere for sure is doing lockdowns, right?
Yeah, you could have, you used to be able to include South Africa and Rhodesia in that list, but unfortunately, those are no longer Anglosphere countries. Yes, the West, for some reason, has particularly taken the lockdowns to heart. This is, I believe, is a cultural thing, but we won't get into that here. And basically what has happened is all of these countries have locked down many of their businesses in order to fight this pandemic. and basically destroyed their economies. Now, obviously, different states within those or provinces within those countries are doing it a little bit differently, and some are doing better than others. But as an aggregate, everyone is down on production, and everyone is up on unemployment and increase in the money supply. So this is a
Right.
very unstable situation, and now we add into the mix the political instability
Right.
to a point where, which is very unusual, to a point where the right is willing not only to get out and protest, but is willing to get out there and be violent. That is a very hard thing to do. Just as a general rule, it is usually the left that gets out there and
Right. Right.
is protesting and is very active. But to get the right out there is something incredibly unique, and is not a good
Right.
sign.
Now, to not overstate the case, what we saw yesterday involved people basically pushing past police, mostly, in terms of the protesters themselves. As I've often heard over 2020, talking about the Antifa type violence, which has been terrible in my view. But I've heard people saying, yeah, but if the right ever really turns it on, it's going to make the Antifa violence look like nothing. That is, we expect our kind of expectation is that you get this sort of low level but still unacceptable violence from the left, but that if the American right was to really go for it, it would be 0 to 50. It'd be really massive, and that's not really what we saw. They didn't come in guns blazing or anything like that. Okay, so
I personally believe that the only reason there wasn't more we're past the threshold. Yeah, okay. The reason there wasn't more violence is because the police were probably enforcing a gun-free zone around the White House. Apart from that, if you had people carrying to the Capitol building, I think you would have seen something very much different to what happened.
Could be.
But
Go ahead.
What I really want to say is that we saw this kind of with the BLM protests, in the sense that once the protests got to people with power, once the people with power had to face the protesters themselves. So we saw this with the mayor of Portland, and we saw this with a few people in Washington, a few politicians in Washington. Then the riots stopped, because then the police were able to crack down on it. Now that a lot of senators and a lot of congressmen have seen the protests and really seen the anger of a lot of these people, I think what you're going to see is people start to get arrested, and people are going to get knocks in the middle of the night. When that happens, you're going to start to see more violence. When you start to see more violence, people are going to be targeted, and when they are targeted, areas are affected. So we need to really focus on of that is going to be, at least for this show, and how certain sectors are going to be affected. Now, if we're talking violence in the cities, first two things we need to think about are, firstly, the financial system. A lot of major cities have a lot of major financial systems in the center of their cities. If there's riots and protests and violence, serious violence, then that's going to be heavily affected. We could even see the market closed on in certain days to stem market reaction. Especially if, for example, Wall Street is seriously compromised. This could be heavily devastating to the world economy, as the stopping of the transfer of money and the flow of money is basically a death nail for a lot of companies, as there's a huge amount of debt running through the system. And without the ability to service that debt, they go under very quickly. Your thoughts, Redwood?
Right. Yeah. So this is something that people may not understand, right? A man on the street who doesn't run their own business might think that, the rich capitalists are just sitting there rolling around in their piles of money, when in fact what's happening often is that they are rolling over loans and trying to just keep ahead of their debt, right? That's kind of the picture I've been getting, Medmerk, that businesses are debt heavy. I mean, like here. Okay, so let me give an illustration from something I happen to pay attention to because one of my hobbies, which is Apple. I like Apple products historically. Still like them so far. We'll see. And they, as everyone knows, were just making boatloads of money, right? And they, were generating cash every quarter. And so it sort of shocked me when they said, we're going to be taking on some debt. And I was like, why would you do that? You need debt to grow? You've got cash. Just use the cash. Well, part of it had to do with complicated tax stuff, that if they repatriated the cash from these other countries, they'd have to get hit pretty hard on the way in. They'd rather leave it as cash over there and borrow, say, within the United States at a modest rate, which they can get, right, because they're Apple. But anyway, even Apple was getting into this thing where they're servicing debt. Well, I think there's other companies that are, not in Apple's position of generating massive amounts of cash. And they are just trying to keep ahead of servicing their debt. Madmark, can you still talk? I'm not hearing from you. Uh-oh. Well, anyway, drop out and rejoin if you need to. Oh, there you are. Madmark?
Yes. Hello. Yes. Sorry, I have no idea what's going on. Never nationalize your internet. That's the only lesson I take from this.
Right.
Yes, 100%. And again, the government getting in the way of business being able to operate efficiently because they have imposed this rule, which then basically creates bad incentives for companies to take out more and more debt.
Right.
Again, we are seeing a re-emerging pattern with government.
Right.
So, if a company has no ability to service their debt because the transfer of funds has basically paused because of some violent event that's happening in the city, then this could potentially lead to huge, and I mean huge, defaulting on loans. And if loans are, it's like dominoes, right? Once one major company defaults on its loans, then another one will, and another one will, and then banks go down. When banks go down, other banks go down. When other banks go down, the whole nation starts to fall apart. Now, am I saying that this is the end of the world? No.
What we saw was that they were doing bailouts when it got to the point where the banks are affected, right?
Right. And then this comes back to the other point we need to look at is, okay, the financial sector is in distress. The real economy, the one that produces stuff, is in distress.
Mm-hmm.
What will the Federal Reserve do? Well, we have seen from their actions in the pandemic that what their solution is to do quantitative easing and MMT, modern monetary theory, which is essentially trying to, as they put it, quote, lubricate, unquote, the system with more money. This will increase the money supply and inflate the dollar away, making it harder, as we understand from Austrian economics, for average everyday people to get by. Guys, this is not good. Not only will you see an increase in demand and a reduction in the supply of certain goods and services if a civil conflict breaks out, but it will be harder for those average everyday citizens to pay for those things because their money supply is being inflated. That's just the domestic level. It's so
right. So one possibility here is that with recession you get unemployment, and then let me share this quote from Mises. He says, "Permanent mass unemployment destroys the moral foundations of the social order. The young people who, having finished their training for work, are forced to remain idle, are the ferment out of which the most radical political movements are formed. In their ranks, the soldiers of the coming revolutions are recruited. Mises saw a little bit of that sort of thing in real life, so he knows what he's talking about. We've talked about the overproduction of elites being a problem. Too many people with college degrees, basically, who think that their college degree is giving them a ticket to join the elites, and then find out there's a lot of people with college degrees, and they don't all get to join the elites. That's an issue that brings revolutionary potential. But also just generally young people, not ignore the college degree part. Young people not being engaged fruitfully in the economy, right? Because say there's a lockdown going on, or the economy's fallen apart, or there's social chaos or whatever chaos. All of these things can lead to the conditions for revolt, and this is particularly worrying because, as I said, we've got a regime that, as far as I can tell, is not interested in negotiating or placating, understanding why people are upset. They just bring the hammer down harsher and harsher. And you combine that with price inflation, unemployment, harder to get what you need to support your family. A lot of young people not busy working, but laying around, not sure what to do. Not a great stable situation for your society. So I've got an article, Mad Merc, that I think can transition us here from some years ago, called "The Demise of the Dollar," and he shows how it really connects into the international system and talks about the consequences of the system falling apart. Is that an okay to bring that in at this point?
If we want to transition to the international scene, let's go for it.
Yeah, well, this is going to be talking about the domestic scene as well, but I think it helps us start do the connecting tissue between these things. So I'm going to share my copy of the article. I've been learning how to do this stuff. I save the article as a PDF, because then I can highlight the sections I want to highlight for you. Now, so that there's no bias, this is an article from a while ago. Does it show the date? Doesn't it show the date? Anyway, it's from 2002. Where'd the date go? Anyway, it's a 2002 article. And as usual, let me share the link to that article so you can look at it yourself if you like. There are some tables that I'm probably going to sort of skim past that you might want to look at more carefully. This is from 2002, so some of the numbers are out of date, but I think it gives a good picture of the international system we're talking about. So what he says is that since the 80s, the United States has been a big importer, okay? And how is it doing all this importing? Debt creation. And it's swamped the international monetary system with liquidity. That is, as Peter Schiff, right? Am I saying that right? Yeah, Peter Schiff would say, China sends us goods and we send them green pieces of paper. How sustainable is this, right? Okay, so when I say that, it's not just a joke. Well, okay, I'll show you numbers in a moment. But he goes on to say the United States could act as the global borrower and as the international lender of last resort at the same time. So the U.S. is doing all this borrowing from abroad and also loaning. So it's the main provider of international liquidity, and it's unsustainable. So look at this. Current global financial system is tilted towards favoring excessive absorption by the United States as it shows up in the current account imbalances. This is kind of a stunner here. So these are the account balances, which people make too much of account balances sometimes when they're in a protectionist mode. But it does tell a story that's interesting here, right? Which is that goods. Okay, I'm sorry. Help me get this right, Madmer. An account balance. It's showing that the U.S. is taking more goods in than it's sending out. I think that's what this is telling us. It's sending the money
By a
out
large margin. Yes, by a
by a
large
large
margin.
margin. And in general, there's 1 year in 2000 where EU is negative, but in general, European Union, Japan, emerging Asia, they are taking the money and sending us the goods, right? So sending the U.S. the goods. And he says eventually this is unsustainable. And when the discrepancy between the issue of debt and the productive capacity becomes too large. The U.S. has been quite productive economically, and I think that's part of why it was able to get away with this. But obviously, 2020 was a bit of a hit to that. So that increases the instability of this picture we're getting. Now, I did not pull up current numbers on that. That would be worth doing if I don't know how to get these numbers. Oh, IMF could give it. Yeah, so anyway, it'd be interesting to see where we're at, say, starting 2018 and then covering the last few years. But I'm going to guess that the U.S. still has a big whopping negative number there, and other major economies have a positive number. So, excuse me, getting rid of one distraction. Okay. Okay, so yeah, international capital flows is what we're talking about. And then he goes through kind of country by country, talking about why he doesn't think this is sustainable. Japan, we actually did a show on and saw how it really crashed after the 90s. And of course, it's got this aging population issue. China has been doing well economically, I think, in many ways. But we've also done a show or two on China. They're kind of a paper tiger economically. They are debt-ridden, and it seems like there is an unsustainable bubble in China, would be our guess. And then he talks about the European Union, and I know less about that. But anyway, 18 years ago or whatever, he was saying he thinks that they're not going to be providing much here. To his guess is that they're going to not keep that positive number up. So here's net long-term capital flows just in those years from 20 years ago. Again, just to give you the picture, positive numbers on the net long-term capital for the United States, negative in Euro area, negative in Japan. This is not an even kind of thing that's going on here. So strength of the dollar reflected massive capital inflows that came to the U.S. from abroad. So that's foreign investors investing in the United States because, stock market goes up, up, up all the time, as Trump likes to say. Stock market's doing great. You lost your family business, but stock market's doing great, right? But that means that people who are looking for a place to invest their money, it has been reasonable so far, until it isn't, right? It's been reasonable to pop some money into the U.S. stock market, say, or some U.S. business, and you probably are going to do okay doing something like that. Okay, so what is the concern? A repatriation of assets out of the United States and back to Japan, Europe, other foreign creditors would affect the international payment ability of the United States in a direct way, because it would imply a weakening of the U.S. dollar and probably lead to higher interest rates. And the U.S. economy would face a severe economic downturn. Now, what Matt Merck's bringing up here is that there's another way for this to happen, besides the other countries saying, okay, we're sick of this. We're sick of funding you guys. And that is for there to be instability within the United States, which until, say, 2020 and yesterday might have seemed like crazy talk, right? Only the conspiracy theorists think that there could be instability in the United States, domestic instability like we see in, third world countries and all that kind of thing. Well, I would say, I'm not making any predictions, but specific predictions, but I would say that our imagination has been expanded in the last year, and yesterday in particular, about what can happen in the United States.
The possibility for instability, internal instability within the United States is not unlikely at this point.
Right. It seems
I don't say that as something that I don't say that as something that's a good thing. I don't say that as something that's something to be looked forward to, or I don't say this as something that is a certainty either. This is just a speculation, but it is not unlikely.
Yeah, I am afraid that's the case. So, it's really, the United States seems so mighty, I think, in many ways. It does to me. I think the U.S. government say, and the economy. But really, there's fragility right under that surface. Really, the U.S., as you can see here, is to some degree at the mercy of foreign investors. They can call it in, and the U.S. would be in trouble. There could be a recession just because of recession and inflation, just because of the lockdowns and so forth, have made an unsustainable economic situation. Add in some political instability, and hard to say what could happen, but there are various factors, and a little bit of each of them could also do it, I think, as opposed to, something dramatic in one area. Some instability with some creditors saying, yeah, I'm getting nervous about the U.S. and pulling out, with some price inflation. You add up a bit of each of these and you have a bad situation. So what would be the consequences of a diminished position of the U.S. dollar? So as we were saying, the U.S. dollar is really a linchpin of the international monetary system at this point. It's a dollar-based system, really. Even if you're using euros, the dollar is underneath somehow. So he says the consequences would actually be dramatic, and they'd affect the whole globe. Within the U.S., if the U.S. dollar was not the dominant global currency, or died basically effectively as the global currency, it would mean that the relation, I want to read his exact words here because I think he's being very professorial and understated, but I think we can translate it into more punchy prose. He says, the current relation between domestic absorption and production could no longer be maintained. That means right now the U.S. is consuming more than it's producing because of ongoing investment from abroad, right? Given the time, so that couldn't be maintained. So he's saying, what am I trying to say here? He's saying right now, you've got consumption is really out of line with production. Production is below consumption, right? And he says, if the rest of the world isn't funding it anymore, then these things got to come together. They got to start coming together, right? And he says, first, could production capabilities come up to meet the consumer demand in the U.S.? He says, well, not quickly, right? That's this last sentence. Given the time and difficulties it takes to build up adequate production capabilities, that's not going to happen. That the production is going to come up to meet the consumption, right? So he says the immediate response would necessarily fall on private demand. That is, getting my hands mixed up. That would mean that the consumption would have to drop down to meet the actual production that the U.S. does, as opposed to sort of the bonus amount of consumption that the U.S. currently does as the dominant global currency, as the place where foreign investment pours in, and so forth. And that means a bit of a shocker for people in the U.S., right? Your dollar would not go as far, let's put it that way, in buying the things that you need. Okay, so that's mostly what I want to get out of that article. I'm going to dismiss it, if that's okay, Mad Merc.
Go ahead. I'd just like to comment on world trade at the moment, if we could transition to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The dollar, as we mentioned before, the dollar's the reserve currency. It's the underpinning of this entire system. If it loses value, what are people going to use? Now we could speculate on this, and I'd like to have a back and forth on this. What are people going to use for international trade? I have a few thoughts running through my head at the moment. Because let's say this goes to, 100 out of 10 really quickly, and we see a full on domestic conflict in the United States that is not a LARP. That is a very real domestic conflict within the United States. Because the United States dollar is based on the power and security of the United States government rather than any other gold or silver-backed currency, then people start to have to look to alternatives for trade. You can't go to the euro because the euro is just about as unstable as the US dollar at the moment. You can't trust the Chinese because the Chinese manipulate their currency like crazy and are on the brink of collapse as it is anyway with their economy. If you don't understand what we mean by that and you think that China is this next global superpower, I urge you to go watch our episodes on China. They are very much a paper tiger. We did that in collaboration with Semiagog and economic I can never remember his name.
Erudite?
Sorry?
Economic erudite?
Erudite, thank you.
Yeah.
You can't go to Japan because they're still trying to get out of a recession. And then who do you have left? You can't go to Canada. They can't really supply a global system. You can't go to Australia or New Zealand. Who do you go to? My immediate thought is, well, you need to go back to something that's more stable, that's more secure. The first thought is obviously to most people is gold and silver. The second thought to people who are a bit more technically minded is electronic currencies such as Bitcoin or Ethereum or something like this.
Right.
So we have to really think about this for a second. What is the alternative if this all goes to hell?
Yeah.
Because
Not
one of us could imagine a year ago that we would be talking about this, but here we are, and who knows where we're going to be in a year's time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so let's be clear. This is slightly different topic than should you squirrel Bitcoin away or gold away, right? Because that's a topic about what's a good idea to protect yourself. What you're bringing up, Mad Merc, is what would become the international, the dominant global currency of exchange, right? Now, if you knew that ahead of time and you squirreled some of that away, you'd probably come out all right. But you wouldn't necessarily. Let's say Bitcoin. Let's imagine it lands on Bitcoin. It's so cheap to transfer Bitcoin internationally, and so it really is a home run for doing international trade. Does that mean that any gold that you squirreled away is worthless? No, not at all. Just because we don't land on gold as like the international money doesn't mean that gold would be valueless in the case of a US dollar collapse. I suspect gold would be a really good thing to have in the case of a US dollar collapse. So just wanted to distinguish between the usual discussion, which is like, what should I personally save, versus what you're bringing up, which is what do we expect to happen to the international trade, I guess you could say, in the case of a dollar collapse. And in that case, yeah, the options you bring up are the things to talk about. Did you bring up the yuan, the Chinese currency? I don't remember if you commented on that.
Yeah, the yuan, as we said, is not only a fiat currency, but it's probably one of the most heavily manipulated currencies in human history. The yuan is backed by the Chinese economy. We have done a deep dive on the Chinese economy to show the flaws of its system. It is Keynesianism taken to its most extreme forms and then some. It is not going to be stable. It is not a stable system. I think you're going to see extreme problems with that system. It is not a good thing to watch. Just going back to the point about Bitcoin. Bitcoin, as we know, if anyone has been following anything at the moment, Bitcoin is on a storm at the moment. It is about to, I think today, about to breach 40,000 US dollars per Bitcoin. That is from a low of 6,000 at the start of the year. Sorry, not at the start of the year, but at the end of last year. We are looking, I think what we're actually looking at here is the market looking at the system and becoming very worried with it and finding alternatives, which has really driven the Bitcoin rally, in my opinion. Again, that's my opinion. We saw this after 2008. Bitcoin had a large rally. It got to 19,000. And now, with the current instability, it is about to breach 40,000. I think Bitcoin might be it. It may not be, because again, there are a lot of people who don't own Bitcoin and who do own alternatives such as gold and silver. But I think what we can see with the Bitcoin rally bull market is that it is very much a sign of how people are viewing this instability and moving their capital into assets other than the traditional stock market.
Yeah, now I want to be careful about the timing, because when things happen very close to each other, you can get your cause and effect reversed, right? The Bitcoin had some spectacular movements prior to yesterday, right? Just to say it out loud so we remember, right, Madmer?
Yeah, it did have some spectacular moments. Excuse me, I did get that date wrong. I'm terribly sorry. I meant after during 2017. That was my fault. It didn't mean, for some reason my brain went to 2008. That was wrong.
In fact, let's see here. Let me see if I can get a 1 month, or maybe a 1 year is better. Oh yeah, here we go. Let's just show the chart real quick, because hey, we're the Deep Lore Econ chat. We can show charts. We're not afraid. So let me share a Bitcoin chart real quick, just in case you weren't hearing about this. Take a look at this. So I've set it to 1 year. Is that coming through? Okay. I've set it to 1 year. Notice the line going up. That is, let's say that the beginning of that really steep rise is December 11th. Going back a little bit earlier, it seemed to be about late October that you're in that sort of slower slope. And then on around December 11th, it just goes boom, like vertical almost. That is crazy. So that's about the last month, less than a month, slightly less than a month, that you see that vertical line. And it goes from one Bitcoin being worth about 18,000 to, let's see, the current price I can get, 36,000. And I was just hearing somebody saying, wow, it hit 35,000. Well, that was like a day ago. That's old news. Now we're over 36,000 and going. So anyway, just to make the point that the exciting events, dramatic events of yesterday,
if you invested $100,
this has been going on for a month, most dramatically, and really for another month or two before that, it's been on the rise. But then this last month, it's nuts. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. If you invested $100 at the beginning of this, you've made your profits back 40. I think it's like nearly 40 times over.
The beginning of what?
Of this rally.
What do you mean? You mean in October, or you mean December?
Right there in October. If you put $100 in Bitcoin, which is, what's $100, you've made your money back, I think something like 35 times over by now.
No, that's not right. So it was at 10,000, and now it's
was it 10,000 there, or was it
36,000? No.
Oh,
It's a
I'm
10.
sorry. I'm sorry.
It's a 10.
It's very small. I'm looking at my own chart at the moment. It was
Yeah,
four
back in April, it was closer to
back in
5.
April. Yes.
Yeah.
My
But in
mistake. I'm looking at the
October,
wrong date.
right, if you bought it around 10, then you've more than tripled your money
More than tripled. Yeah.
in what, 3 months, 2 or 3
Yeah.
months. That's nuts. Yeah. So anyway, that's quite interesting. Now, interestingly, some people see those high prices and they just see volatility and they say, "Hey, we want a money that's not so crazy." I don't know. Depends on what you're trying to do with your Bitcoin, I guess, right? So let's see here. Okay, so I do want to move towards super chats soonish. Just wanted to say that. We don't need to do it right this moment, but just want to be winding towards super chats because we have a few, not a ton, but a few, and one that I missed from our stream with Simiagog and Pharaoh.
Okay.
Didn't really have to. We don't need them to answer it because it didn't really have to do with what we were doing on that show. It's just a super chat someone threw out that I didn't want to miss. But anyway, yeah. So did you finish what you had on your mind about international trade?
Yeah. So basically, all I'm saying is that in the future, this will putting the international political stuff aside, because that's obviously another aspect that we haven't even covered about how if the international system of the dollar collapses and there's more instability, there will also be more political instability in the world, which will require governments to spend more on their defense systems and all that sort of stuff,
Right.
putting further strain on the economy. Again, this is a downward spiral, people. Please be prepared. But what we're talking about here is basically how does the international system cope in the chaos and in the interim of trying to find another, not reserve currency, but reserve system. It used to be gold, then it used to be pound sterling, then it used to be or still is, the United States dollar. What will be next? Now, let's get to the Fed, because I think this is the interesting part, and this is what I really want to speculate about.
Okay.
Now, as we know, in the United States, the Fed has different branches in different areas of the United States. So, in St. Louis, there's a branch of the Fed there, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, this is as far as a branch of the Fed can be based. The St. Louis one is. They seem to come out with good stuff. I've noticed over the years. If you see something from a Federal Reserve branch and it's like, this sounds kind of sane, check if it's the St. Louis branch. It's probably just like one guy over there or something. But anyway, just a trivia for you.
Right. Now, let's think. This is total wild speculation based fictional reality, I guess. In this, I understand probably will never happen, but I do want to speculate this just for a little bit of fun. Because there are different branches of the Fed, and let's say there is a secession or civil conflict that is serious with battle lines drawn, do we see different branches of the Fed staying with the federal government and not seceding, or potentially, and this goes into the cathedral and the elites, do we see a Federal Reserve branch split off with the secessionists and try to position itself as the Federal Reserve of whatever secessionist state emerges?
Yeah. So you get
the movement from the beginning.
You get your Republic of California or whatever, and then I assume they have at least one branch out there. I don't know where it is, probably San Francisco, and that becomes the essentially the Federal Reserve of the Republic of California. Say, let's imagine that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't have anything useful to say on that except that it's a very interesting question, and we'd probably have to think it through a bit whether that makes any sense at all. Are the Federal Reserve branches simply creatures of the system, And so it would make no sense for them to have an existence beyond that. Now, bear in mind, we're dealing, as you talked about, I was thinking, you were talking about how the US dollar, it's not backed by anything except the full faith and credit of the United States federal government, right? That's the phrase they like to use in these contexts.
Right.
And as implied by that, and as you've been saying, trust basically and perception becomes a big issue. So one plausible scenario I could see is simply that, did you ever see a movie called The Postman? The Postman?
I don't believe I have.
Okay, anyway, I haven't seen the movie, but I've read the book. The Postman by David Brin, one of these post-apocalyptic things, And in it, this guy just starts going around and being a postman again. He doesn't represent anybody. He just is like, I'm trying to get us talking to each other again, so I deliver the mail. That's what I do, And he's, having to basically survive in a wild post-apocalyptic scenario. But part of the idea of the book is that he basically is able to sort of bring about the memories of people of how, there used to be the US government and there used to be these people who would bring you mail, and he was able to kind of ride on that, and people would sort of trust him and be like, oh, like in the old days, you're a postman. Well, so you could almost imagine somebody, a Federal Reserve branch, basically riding on sort of habit, memory, and just saying, hey, you can trust us. We'll make sure that the whole, the banking system of this little area not little, but this relatively smaller area than the United States, this breakaway area or whatever, we're going to make sure it all works, and we'll back up the local bank that you're trying to deal with, and we'll be the lender of last resort, and so on and so forth, right? Basically try to recreate the system on a smaller scale. I don't know. I don't think it's completely bonkers suggestion, Matt. It's interesting. Have to think more about. I have to say, I'm not sure I've ever seen anything on Mises.org or heard anything at the Institute imagining a post-apocalyptic scenario where Fed branches start doing their own thing. Only Austrians would bring this into their post-apocalyptic scenario. What will the Fed branches be doing? Well, they're shooting each other for food.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it post-apocalyptic, and this I actually want to preface this, or be a bit more clear. What we're talking about is not end of the world, nukes flying off everywhere, no one's left living. We're not talking about that. What we are talking about is a significant shift in the way that international trade works and the way that the domestic economy of the United States works. In any adjustment period, there is going to be conflict, there is going to be pains, and very significant pains. Just like with any recession, right? We often talk about in the Austrian school how a recession is the market kind of realigning itself, and it's a self-healing mechanism, and that it should be embraced, and that when something crashes, it's because there was something wrong with it, right? So, but if we have a major crash, then there's something majorly wrong with the system that we're in, which will mean major pain and major readjustment.
Changes.
So I just want to make that clear that we are not talking about post-apocalyptic sci-fi zombies running around. We're not talking about that. We are talking very seriously about what happens in a crisis. I do mean a crisis where there is massive political instability and domestic violence within the borders of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I want to make sure that we give due attention to the super chat. So let's jump to those, handle those, and that might give us a chance to talk about anything else on our mind as we go. Is that okay?
Let's go for it.
Yeah, we've got a car to go pick up from the shop, so I need to make sure to not run long today. Okay, so as I said, first thing to do is pick up one from our show with Semiagog and Pharaoh on December 27th. That's what it says. So that must have been when it was. In Czech, kroners maybe? I'm learning about currencies through super chats, international currencies. He says, how about a full...
I think the Czech Republic uses euros, so I don't think it
Oh,
would be krona.
what is this then? CZK is what it says. Is the country of origin. Anyway, so MIKI, Mickey the Fourth, wrote, how about a full course on academic agency on homeschooling young children? Well, as I've mentioned, two responses to that. Number one is that Academic Agent is really doing a big favor to homeschoolers, in my view, by putting together a trivium set of courses. The trivium, the classical schooling, is something a lot of homeschoolers are into. We're into it to some degree ourselves. It says that you have three tools of learning. That's the trivium, and that's logic, rhetoric, and grammar. Okay. And then you go on to the quadrivium, and that builds on the trivium, and then you get into your particular subject. But the trivium are your basic things that you should know. And Academic Agent is self-consciously creating a set of courses for that cover the trivium. He has already done Foundations of Writing, which covers the grammar, and he goes beyond that because he's a writer. His profession was in that area. He goes beyond that and even gets into sort of prose style and stuff like that. So really outstanding course for those who need to communicate with the written word. Then he's working on Foundations of Logic. He's sweating over that one right now because people are pre-ordering it, have pre-ordered it, and he's trying to get it thrown together. And then the third one would be Foundations of Rhetoric, and rhetoric has to do with persuasion. So anyway, Academic Agency is already putting together something that's going to be really useful to homeschoolers, I think. But furthermore, Miki the Fourth brought up homeschooling, and what I wanted to mention is that my wife has agreed to appear on stream. It won't be this show; it'll just be a one-off thing she and I do, and do a Q&A on homeschooling. So please watch for that on the channel. Should be soon. She's looking forward to it. And she's already told me some of the things she wants to say right up front, and some resources that sort of helped her come at this thing, this homeschooling thing. I think you would, if all you caught was those first like 10 minutes or so where she sort of has some preparatory, some initial comments to make, I think you would find it really, really valuable. But then I'm hoping we'll have a good audience to ask my wife questions. She's pretty much the one who does the homeschooling. And so she's really the one that needs to be answering the questions, and I'll just moderate and give her questions to answer from you guys. So it'll be a homeschooling Q&A. I'll probably call it homeschooling Q&A with Mrs. Radleb or something like that, So look for that soon, probably in January. We don't have a date picked out yet, but quite soon. So not a full course, but even better, something that will be freely available to you as soon as we pick a date for it. Okay, so next we have Benjamin Rood. God bless you guys and your families. Thank you, sir. We have Bio Gundam. Keep up the good work. Have some money. Thank you. Much appreciated. Sensum Communum says, will it be back of the queue Biden, like Obama, for a spritz, or will Boris's condemnation of Trump today grease the wheels in this respect? Okay, so this is having to do with Brexit and the UK needing to make new trade deals because, as I understand it, the deal in the EU, well, it depends on which agreements you're in, but the agreements that the UK was in the EU meant that it was part of the trade system, and that meant that the EU would do negotiations with other governments around the world, and the UK just abided by those agreements. Well, now with Brexit having, in theory, actually happened at the end of 2020, the UK has to renegotiate deals with everybody, with Australia and with everybody. So the question is, it has been looking like Trump was going to give a pretty good deal to the UK, more free trade, along the lines of free trade. Rhetorically, I don't know the details. The details of the things in these trade deals, this managed trade that they do. But supposedly, Trump was going to give the UK a really good deal because Trump is basically, you could say, broadly like pro-Brexit or of that mindset or something. Whereas Obama had already been making noises that the UK would get bad treatment from him. And I'm sorry to say, I already heard from Biden saying something about, I'm not in the details of these negotiations, but there's something about the Irish backstop, or no, not that. It's the Irish border, hard border versus soft border between North Ireland, Republic of Ireland. Anyway, Biden's already said, I don't want you to do such and such, So he's already like interfering or trying to interfere even before he's officially the president. So it doesn't bode well how Biden's going to be with this. Did you have comments, Mad Mark, on Biden and the prospects for trade with the UK and US?
My opinion is that Biden, in a Biden administration, which will soon be a Kamala Harris administration, will probably push for Boris. The question here is not, in my opinion, any sort of U.S. administration. It's more about the UK, because the UK. I don't know whether because Boris has made such a stand about getting out of the EU, even if he doesn't agree with it, which is more than likely at this point. He still has to do it because that's the election promise, right? That was the promise made to the people. My theory is that in a Biden-Harris administration, they will be pushing for Boris maybe not to rejoin the EU, but effectively rejoin the EU in a sense that they will have everything but the name of rejoining the EU. And I think Boris would probably fold to that. So that would be my theory.
Yeah, okay. So, right, you're seeing Biden's very much on board with globalism, if you want to use that term, right? He is going to, Biden is going to push for the UK to get back on the globalist train. Now, having said that, Academic Agent has been pointing out what betrayal the Tories have been to any hopes of not being globalist. And so I don't think it would take much for Boris to even more fully sell out, maybe, on his signal campaign issue. But I think Biden, I agree. Biden seems to be fully signed on member of the global ruling elite and the globalist, the World Economic Forum type stuff, the Build Back Better phrase we see Biden having behind him sometimes. This is straight from Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. So he seems to be fully on board with this kind of crap. So not good sign in my view, because as we've discussed in one of our shows, there is a difference between managed trade and free trade. And when you hear them talking about trade deals, that's managed trade. You can just tell right away, because there's no real deal with free trade. You just take down your tariffs. You just unilaterally remove your tariffs. That's literally what the United Kingdom did in the 19th century. Great Britain did in the 19th century. They just dropped their tariffs with everybody. And they did very well by doing that. Okay, ready to move on to the next one?
We got about 10 minutes left, so let's smash through them.
We're doing good. Okay. The one here to stay says loss of Christianity led us here. Time to go back. Sure. Yes.
Yeah, this is actually something Oswald Spengler brings up, in the fact that the increase in and now I don't mean to be harsh on our atheistic viewers, but the increase of atheism in a society is actually the beginning of the end.
And I'm sorry, who's that again? Spengler?
Oh, Spengler, yeah. So
yeah, I mean, obviously, I think there's a really different. This is a case where the outlook for the United States and the outlook for the rest of Europeans, Christendom or Anglosphere or whatever, seems quite different. My sense is that the United States remains, there's a heavy Christian element, whereas in the United Kingdom, it's pretty much gone, I think. It's very, very small minority that has little to no influence. I gather Australia is, what did I hear? Was this a rumor? Is this urban myth, Mad Merc, that Australia is officially pagan? I heard somebody say that. Is that crap?
That would be interesting to hear, considering we're part of the Commonwealth, and head of the church is Her Royal Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who is
Okay.
also head of the Commonwealth. So,
okay, well, maybe that makes no sense then. But yeah, would you say that Australia is the Bible Belt?
no,
Okay,
Australia is an atheist nation.
Atheist nation. Okay, right. And Steve Turley, one of his white pills for me as a Christian, is that he has documented that there is resurgence in Christianity in places that you would not guess, like France. So there's some interesting things going on along those lines. It's going on quietly because it's not the sort of thing to be hailed by the legacy media, right? Any sign of, I don't know, left wingism, and they're going to do a big song and dance about it. But a bunch of young people starting to go back to church, you're not going to know about it unless like you know those people, right? So there are some interesting trends that are happening under the radar, I think, and keeping them under the radar is probably a great idea. So let's just keep it among ourselves, folks, that Christianity might be resurgent in wider Europe. Okay, so let's do this last one, maybe.
By the way, crisis, not to be put a positive spin on this, but crisis anywhere in the world usually brings about a stronger sense of community and a stronger sense of religion. Again, so if we have crises across the world, especially conflict, that could spur more religiosity. Just a food for thought.
Yes. Yeah, well, now that is a good point. Okay. Sorry, lining up. I'm trying to do this thing where I do the banner. Use the banner to display super chats. I wish there was a cleverer way. They've really got to solve this with StreamYards. But anyway, yeah, well, that is an interesting point. Going back to this super chat, we didn't talk about the spiritual religious impact of crisis, right? And it's a little hard to say how that would go. In the case of World War I, what I learned from my Christian friends in the UK is that World War I seemed to really wipe Christianity out for some reason. I haven't done the stats on it, looked at the stats on it, but they said basically whole villages were getting wiped out, and it was a real crisis of faith. Why they blamed God for what their government had gotten them into is another discussion, but there did seem to be some kind of correlation between World War I and Britain going from a great missionizing country, Christian country, to where it is now, which is just single digits, I think, of real Christians in the UK. Okay, let's a couple more came in, so let's keep going. Adam Morgan, Radlib, you've watched the U.S. make bad economic decisions for decades. How can they keep this up, and how do you stay sane? Yeah, so that's true. I think, I was born in 1969, and the 1970s, so, my childhood actually was a time where I was seeing economic distress. You might, you wouldn't remember, most of you, from that time, but you might have heard about President Carter, about price controls on energy, lines, people lined up for petrol, for gasoline, as we call it here, the OPEC oil embargo, where OPEC was trying to manipulate the oil price for some reason. All these things were swirling around when I was quite young in the 70s. So yeah, it was pretty bad. Nixon had put price controls in place, and I don't think, I forget when they went away, but I think some of them were still having bad effects, especially in the energy market. But anyway, I was like 10 at the end of the 70s, so I didn't know all that, but I did remember, gas being like a hard to get a hold of. And this is when they introduced locks on gas caps. Do you guys have that in other countries? Admerk?
No.
Where your gas cap is secured in some fashion? Well, when I was young and they first introduced these, there would be a key to get your to get to your gas cap, to open up the little thing that comes out so you could put gas in there. Now it's sometimes that there's just a button inside the car and you have to press it to pop that open. And not all of them, it's been long enough that not all the gas caps are secured in that way. But the reason they did that is because people would siphon gas out of your tank. That's how much gas was a precious commodity back then. So anyway, all I'm saying is, in my childhood, I got to see some of the results of these bad economic decisions. And then Reagan came along in the 80s, seemed to do much better for most folks. I would say that I personally don't remember really worrying that much. I was learning Austrian economics at some point there. So I was worried from that point of view. But in terms of just what I saw around me, I wasn't worried that much until, say, the collapse of the banking collapse about 10 years ago. I'm sorry, the real estate bust in 2007, 2008. That's the first time I really remember since the 70s going, oh wow, we're seeing some suffering from bad decisions, And then I view these lockdowns as some of the most horrible economic decision making I've seen in my lifetime. So I would count the lockdowns where people are losing their businesses, and essentially the government is centrally controlling who may have a business and who may not, in effect. Okay, well, let's keep going. Let's see. Oh yeah, I had asked about the currency, and Mad Merc said it was the euro, but Mickey the Fourth says in Czechia we don't use the euro, and we have a high reluctance for accepting it. We have enough idiotic ideas of our own how to kill our economy. We don't need the euro, like multiplying our deficit tenfold this year. I couldn't fit this year. There's a limit on these bands. Okay. To be
fair, I did say it's probably the euro.
Right. So that's interesting. So Czechia has its own currency. And there's more from Miki. Also, we officially pledged to accept the euro, but in regards to actually doing it, we were like, nah, who the heck needs promises anyway? Right. Okay. So that's interesting. So Czechia said they were going to join. It's called is it the Eurozone? Is that what they call Eurozone. It? Yeah. When you're inside, you're using the euro. Yeah. So they pledged to join the Eurozone. They just haven't done it. I'd love to hear more about their reluctance for accepting it. That's fascinating. Because in general, I don't know about Czechia, but the Southern Europe, they manage their currencies absolutely horribly. I was in Italy when they had the lira, and it was a mess, Okay, and then one more from Miki the Fourth. Let me try to get this in here. Getting lots of comments with money attached, so we'll take those. Okay, let's see. Let me give you one more from Miki the Fourth. He says, if you're interested, I could come on some episode and give a perspective on the Czech economy and politics. That's an interesting offer, because I bet you that there's probably few English language YouTube economic shows that are going to cover Czechia. Anyway, he'd come on some episode, give a perspective on the Czech economy and politics. It's actually bizarre and funny, like a Japanese man leading the white supremacist movement.
We might take you up on that.
Yeah, actually, I have to say, part of the reason that I'd be tempted is that I did go there. Now, this was it was called the Czech Republic, and I guess they'd renamed it Czechia at that time, or maybe we just called them the Czech Republic and they were Czechia all along. I don't know. But anyway, I was there in 2001, and I really liked it. Like if I was just having had the freedom to wander around Central Eastern Europe, I would certainly want to go back to Prague, right? That's the capital of. Is it really
Yes,
Czechia
Prague.
now? Sorry, I gotta just pull this up. No, it says the Czech Republic. So what is this? What is this Czechia thing? It's what they call it. Czechia Republika, also called by its short form name Czechia. Okay, I got it. And I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. But yeah, so it's now seems to be called Czechia. Well, thanks, Miki, and I will put it in my notes that you've made that offer. And if you are on Twitter or Discord, if you could send me a message so that we have a way of communicating outside of YouTube chats, then I'll know where I can reach you if we want to take you up on that. Get a little briefer on Czechia. That'd be interesting. Okay. Well, anyway, need to wrap it up for today, but just wanted to remind everybody one more time that we're going to our new structure. So we will actually have a show next week. We have been doing it every other week, but for 2021, we're going to see how it goes. Next week won't be a long show like this. It'll be a short show where we do the minis. So we've split the minis out to their own show. And so we'll alternate between minis one week and a deeper topic like this one on the other weeks and go back and forth until YouTube kicks us off, which they might do for today's show. So we'll see. But anyway, thanks so much, everybody, for joining. Mad Merc, any last thoughts before we go? Oh, I'll shill, let me shill AA one more time, Foundations of Economics. See the description of the YouTube stream, and you'll see a discount code that'll get you 10% off. Great way to learn economics, which really does help you understand what's going on around you and help you prepare for it. So I really recommend it. And you can support our show through Subscribestar and Bitcoin. Send us some Bitcoin. We don't get Bitcoin. I mean, you're rich now if you have some Bitcoin, right? Now that it's up at 36,000 and climbing, throw us a little tiny bit of that. Okay. Any thoughts, Mad Merc, before we stop?
Yeah, just 3 things to show. Firstly,
okay,
the Discord. The Discord is there, people.
Yep.
We are regularly talking on there. Lots of great investment advice and lots of channels to help you out with your econ knowledge and understanding the market and understanding what's happening around the world. Central bank trackers, just really fun people in there, some really knowledgeable people in there. We run competitions through there. So again, the last one was the currency competition. This year, we might be doing something different. Wait out for that.
We'll see.
So all you artists out there, please wait for that. We will be running another competition, hopefully.
Somebody in the chat here. Let me see if I can pop it up in the chat here. Wait a second. I thought it was funny. Oh, here we go. Scott Anderson says investment advice in the Discord is not investment advice.
Exactly. Yes.
Disclaimer. Yeah.
Disclaimer. Obviously. But second thing to show, the Bitcoin. Please, guys, support us on Subscribestar, support us through Bitcoin. We do need your help in these times. We do need to try and justify this to Redlib's wife and a few of my family members. Yes, we appreciate the support. And finally, there's one more thing. Redlib, I put a picture in our private show organization in
Hopefully
the Discord.
This doesn't count as Fed posting. Let me grab it real quick.
I think it's a poem. It can't count as Fed posting if it's artistic.
Is that how it works?
Hopefully, I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
Right. Okay, here we go. This will work. Okay, shall I do a dramatic reading?
Please do. Silence, everyone.
The Wrath of the Awakened Saxon by Rudyard Kipling. It was not part of their blood, it came to them very late, with long arrears to make good, when the Saxon began to hate. They were not easily moved, they were icy, willing to wait, till every count should be proved, ere the Saxon began to hate. Their voices were even and low, Their eyes were level and straight. There was neither sign nor show when the Saxon began to hate. It was not preached to the crowd. It was not taught by the state. No man spoke it aloud when the Saxon began to hate. It was not suddenly bred. It will not swiftly abate, though through the chilled years ahead, when time shall count from the date that the Saxon began to hate. All right. And with those grim words, see you all next week. Bye.
Bye, everyone.